Hello and welcome to Razorwire. Today, we are going to be talking about control versus trust, everything around trusting individuals, trusting solutions, trusting third parties, trusting the devices that they're using, the suppliers that they're supplying, to make their service work. And we're talking about control. How do we put controls in place to validate that these are being done? And where is the good line, the balancing line that sits between the two? With two fantastic guests, we're going to be investigating everything related to this particular subject matter. So without further ado, let's get into it. Today on Razorwire, we have two fantastic guests, one of which you will recognize from our professionals line, where we discuss matters of importance, and I get him to argue with his colleague. So we have Iain Pye, and we also have David Higgins. Iain, do you want to kind of give a brief overview to those who may be new to the channel and haven't seen you, and who you are or where you come from?
I'm Iain, as the name says. I've been in the security business for far too long. Believe me, there are some grey hairs here. But yeah, I started out in the Royal Air Force, intelligence, and then moved into the security scene about 2015, where I then worked with Jim from 2016. And then I have gone on to do various cybersecurity management roles, security compliance roles, privacy related, quite a broad range of that, actually. So yeah.
And David.
David Higgins, Senior Director in the Field Technology Office at CyberArk Software. So I've been there coming up to, I'm the same boat as Iain, I've lost count at the time, but quite a while I've been at CyberArk. There I've been doing a lot of work around identity, privileged, etc. And previous to that, I used to work within the security channel community as well. So again, lost kind of track of time, but I had a lot more hair when I first joined the sector, that's for sure.
Didn't we all? When Iain first came working for me, he had a full head of hair. It didn't take long for that to disappear. You're both babies. I've been in this for 25 years. This is why I've got even less hair than both of you combined. Yes, right. Control versus trust. So we did have a debate on privacy versus trust a little while back between Iain and one of our other co-hosts, and it was a nice and hotly debated subject that I got quite a few private DMs about, which was quite interesting. But what I wanted to do, kind of coming out of that, is attack a particular position that I've heard time and time again in my career. And it's particularly important, I think, now because of the way things have changed since all the lockdowns and the remote working and so on and so forth. And that is kind of the whole discussion around control versus trust. One of the things that I hear a lot or have heard a lot over the years, and kind of still do from time to time, is, well, we trust our suppliers and we trust our staff, so we don't need to put massive levels of control in, or, we don't need to kind of worry about that kind of thing. Whereas I'm a kind of old school security person, which is, and our saying is trust is good, but control is better. Trust can be broken, but if you don't have any controls in place to detect the breaking of that trust, or at least have some, way of assessing on a regular basis as well as monitoring, then, you're just kind of setting yourself up for failure. Because as we all well know, trust is a hard commodity to get these days. And now we have immense amounts of third parties providing us as a service functions, platform as a service, software as a service. Everything's going as a bloody service at the moment. HR as a service. And they themselves have third parties, and they have third parties, and there's a whole link of third party assurance, which is, consistently becoming quite a serious problem, as we may have not have seen with one of the big integrators, one of those big organisations that has many billions of pounds worth of contracts from the UK government, who may or may not have lost their entire database stuffed full of your information, my information, pension information. I'm not going to say who it is because I have been looking at some of the comments I noted on my LinkedIn. So, this is where we really come back round to it. First of all, this whole trust versus control and business owners or C-suite executives saying, well, we trust our people, so we don't need to layer any more security. What are your opinions on that? David, you look like you're ready to go with some comments. So let's attack you first.
As you say, there's different ways you could play this out for the control versus trust. The first one that comes to mind as you were just explaining it there is let's put it to the end users, right? And is there a trust that we've educated them enough that they're not going to do the wrong things? Or do we actually just have to presume that they are going to do the wrong thing and therefore we invest more in the controls? There was a recent blog from the NCSC who kind of steered the ship away from reliance on trusting our employees to make the right decision. The fact that we've done security awareness training, which is still, of course, important. I'm not trying to downplay that, but it's that kind of ethical debate of who's at fault if a user receives a phishing email and opens up an attachment that contains malicious content. Is it the end user because they've had security awareness training and they should have spotted that the email was slightly misspelled, or is it a lack of control that stopped that and should have stopped it from executing in the first place on the endpoint? So that's kind of one of the first places I move into is that kind of mindset. Again, we can play it in different places in security. And I think, as you say, as the world's changed, the way that people work has changed, there's very much that single breach mindset now. So perhaps in that scenario, maybe it's an advocation that controls is better than trust. And we know security professionals fall foul sometime of the odd phishing campaign. So can we trust the day-to-day non-security user to always do the right thing? Probably not. And maybe that's an advocation there for control over trust in that particular situation.
Iain, come on, my bearded friend, give us your opinion.
I think no, genuinely, I think you can't. It's not a matter of trust versus control. It's trust and control in my eyes. You've got to have both, the way I see it. Because hark back what you just said, Jim, that trust can be broken, controls can be broken. So you need to have that trust in your employees to actually come forward and say, hey, your security control's broken. I managed to circumnavigate your security controls by accident, to hold their hand up and say, actually, your control's broken, mate. So with it, I think you need a little bit of both. It's not a matter of trust versus control. It's trust and control. So you've got to have the appropriate controls in place, but you've got to have the trust in your partners, your employees, everyone. Essentially, there is an element of trust that you've got to have within that person. And to go back to David's point about the phishing email, whether it's the employee's fault or not, given the fact that we've got ChatGPT now, and what we're seeing is a lot more targeted, better. The classic of the misspelled email is the thing. Those days are pretty much going now, and it's more targeted. It's not a one email mass spam, and you'll get 1 out of 50,000 that you sent. They're a lot more targeted now and a lot harder to spot. So it's that type of thing of there is an element of trust there, but you're going to have a control in that for anomalous detection or along those lines to, detect those type of things.
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree with both of you there. The world is changing. I mean, I do remember a world where people were more concerned about how their employees felt about potentially being monitored or having to answer questions and do training. It was viewed as these are all professional and intelligent people. They should understand by proxy what security concerns we have and how to kind of spot them and all the rest of it. I don't know whether it was kind of a little bit of ignorance or a little bit too much trust that where I used to hear that a lot. I mean, you still occasionally get that argument, but I'm more interested really in the fact that now our third-party attached sort of services have exploded. gone are the days where you install your app server and you put on your the 13 different apps that you were going to serve, along with various different databases. CRM used to be internal, project management tools used to be internal, GRC used to be internal. Now all of that stuff has gone to as a service function. So you've got a lot less control that you can really place, other than maybe on a contractual obligation perspective. But then do you rely on that contract, or do you put in extra steps that require checks and balance? The right to audit, as I've always said to people who are taking on a third party, always make sure that's in your contract, and use it as well. I mean, is that what you're seeing from your perspective markets?
Sort of way to kind of put the trust element out the window for pretty much every service provider, let's be honest. So there is a lot of that now. We're seeing a lot more of right to audit in all contracts coming through. I've certainly put it in every contract I've gone forward to get as well, a right to audit, because there is an element of trust, but since the way the wind has blown, it's gone that way. Essentially, the trust has been broken because of that massive one incident. Now organizations are looking more control around those third parties. Admittedly, there's still an element of trust that you've got to say, because you've got to trust the person that's responded to your questionnaire, signing your contract, and saying that they have got the appropriate controls in place like that. Unless you go in and audit and physically. But then again, there's only the big corporations that have that capability to actually go in and audit. Most organizations can only do a paper audit, so to speak, your generic spreadsheet with a bunch of questions, and then you've got to trust on the actual responses that come back. You don't have an auditor that can physically go in, look at the controls. A lot of the time, it's down to that. So unless you're a big corporation, you can't put in those controls and check them. You're going to have to trust again. So trust and control.
Yeah, I won't disagree with that. As you say, I think, as you rightly say, some of these big service providers, it's not like every single organization in the world is going to be able to walk into their physical data center and perform an inspection. It's just not scalable, right? So there has to be a point where we rely on trust, not just from material that they've supplied us, but of course there's more and more certification coming out there to help build and retain that trust. Service provider X has ascertained certification X, Y, and Z, which kind of helps, I guess, with that decision. But as you say, ultimately, there's a reason an organization will embrace a SaaS platform or infrastructure platform as a service platform, or engage an external service provider to some kind of support function. There's a business benefit to them doing that, and there's never a perfect model with that approach and all the benefits that come by consuming something as a service. As you say, we lose the full visibility because we're not running everything, and trust definitely becomes part of it. We can control some aspects. We can control what's within our own remit, right? But yes, so it is that same summary as Iain said. It's a combination of both elements.
To add to that, actually, if you do have the capability to go in and audit, it's a snapshot in time as well. It's not a continuous audit. Exactly. So you've got to trust them that they're then. They could turn off the firewalls after you've left. God forbid. But
that classic thing with the CEOs in the office, and all of a sudden everyone turns up and is smartly dressed. It's not a real reflection of the office, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. You bring up a good point. Audits and snapshots in time. I mean, my sins. I'm a QSA, PCI DSS QSA, and I have been for far more years than I care to count.
Older than Father Time itself, yeah.
And also sort of ISO and all the rest. I've been dealing with that since 7799, and I'm seeing a really interesting trend in change in the way that organizations are kind of enforcing a level of control, as we're talking about control and trust. Because let's face it, at this point, I think trust has to. Yes, you can have trust, I suppose, but that control is so much better, and snapshot in time audits will, as you say, they could just turn everything off and, or turn it all back on, the moment that you leave. But over in the States, and it's partially to do with cyber liability as well, and we'll go on to liability and where the liability sits. But we're seeing a lot more movement towards using things like continuous pen testing, whereby the end customer is saying, no, you will have continuous pen testing, but you will be able to see the results of that, or at least, you can engage with the company to deal with your situation, but they will provide us with a kind of sanitized report at the end of it of how risky you are, and we're going to engage with them and we'll pay for that, because it's cheaper to do that and get some good liability insurance that will actually pay out than to trust a snapshot in time. And you guys make a really good point. It's like, if you've got, everybody these days seems to have at least 5 or 6, key service providers. Most of them, they end up using Amazon or AWS at the end of their side of things as well, and so on and so forth. And it's hard enough for an organization of any decent size to do a full audit on every single one of their customers. So they're looking at other ways to kind of get assurance that at least there's a bare minimum level of not only, mainly technical security at the moment, as we're seeing. Because GRC security, the policy management and all the rest of it, that does require an audit. You can't automate that process. But when it comes to the technical side, you've got things like Black Kite, you've got continuous pen testing, and we're starting to see a lot of third-party assurance programs that involve that kind of thing now. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that's a way to go? Or do you think it's maybe just a short step towards something a little bit more conclusive? Because, in a world of AI, you never know. We might have all kinds of cool AI tools that will automate all of that, but we don't have that quite now.
Yeah. And I guess with that as well, a lot depends on what you're consuming, right, as a service, and what the risk, of course, associated is. And so I think if you're talking data that's sensitive to yourself for whatever reason, maybe because it's on the governance of GDPR or what have you, I think that becomes a pretty sensible conversation to understand what is, you're shifting that workload, that application from being your own to now being run by somebody else. If it was your own, you'd absolutely be doing, the regular pen tests and vulnerability scanning and all that great stuff. So I think it's a very sensible, logical conversation to be had. I guess as it kind of comes back probably to Ian's point before a little bit as well. If it's one of the big players that you're talking to, but you're only a small fish in the sea, what's that scalability model for them to be able to do that, release that? So releasing vulnerabilities is one thing, but then what's their SLA in terms of fixing those and the way that they judge criticality? Are you aligned on the way that you view vulnerabilities? That they may see something as being moderate and you see it as critical, right? Are you aligned in? And obviously that's where standards and frameworks perhaps come to help you out on that point. But as I say, I think it's a sensible position to have, and I guess it's going to vary depending on what it is you're consuming.
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, you'd have continuous monitoring, you'd have that continuous pen testing, you'd have that, but that's not going to be available to everyone. There is going to have to be that element of trust again, where you have that. It is the way forward, I'll admit that, definitely. But it's just not feasible for everybody, and not everybody can, from the insurance point of view that you're taking over, can afford to pay the premiums that are coming out at the moment as well. So there's a lot of self-insurance going on. It's a bit of a give and take situation, and just unfortunately, it's the world the way it is at the moment, especially the economy.
Do you think it's a case that maybe, people out there who are in information security and are seeing a change in supplier for, I don't know, let's just say CRM, maybe they're changing their CRM supplier, but rather than kind of doing ongoing, consistent kind of regular audits of them, which may be outside of their ability to do, that they maybe do much deeper due diligence on the project of when they're doing that proof of concept, and gain at least a layer of understanding as to where they are at that point in time, and then maybe kind of reiterate that every time that service is maybe renewed. Because, I mean, most of these services are kind of engaged with on a 3 to 5 year rolling kind of contract, really, aren't they? You know, people don't like to migrate away from them, but, you know, at least, you know, every 3 years you can kind of go back to the supplier and say, look, you know, we're going to look back on any incidents that we've had in the past, and we want to see, you know, where you are at the moment, and then we will renew. You kind of force that service provider to kind of renew based off of an audit from yourself. So rather than doing it every year, you're doing it maybe every 3 or every 5. And as David, you mentioned something quite interesting, you know, it also depends on the risk. You know, a CRM solution, for instance, is usually quite a high criticality of like data classification over, I don't know, a web service provider. You know, I mean, if a web server goes down, it's annoying and all the rest of it, but normally it'll fail over to another one. Let's hope that's what you have had set up. You know, Iain having worked for a company of that nature back in the day. But you know, if they are providing you, say, with your full kind of data services for all of your kind of IP, for instance, if you're a manufacturing firm, you know, restrict these audits and what have you to just those really high-end people. Set a bar on your data classification. Anything we class as top secret needs to go through this process. Anything we deem as confidential, maybe we have a slightly different process. It's just, you know, if we're talking about control being the way to go, and the fact, you know, in a world where trust is becoming increasingly more difficult, is that the way that we look at it going forward? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, from my previous experience, what I've always done with vendors is looked at criticality to the business. It's not just the data that forms part of how you assess the criticality to the business. You take basic questions like, you know, can we live without them, all that jazz, you know, for X amount of time and stuff. Then move it into the actual criticality of the data and stuff like that. That'll form from what I've done is like a tiered system of how critical is this supply to us. The top ones get the most in-depth review and everything from that point of view. And then you go into that contract, you have the right to audit and stuff like that. So going forward to do that in case there is an incident or anything like that. So you can actually go back to them and go, hang on, mate, we need to look at your controls again because X, Y, Z's happened. The lower down ones, they're kind of like a light touch. So like I take for a medium critical, say high, medium, low. Let's just those 3 for a medium criticality. If they say they've got ISO 27001, depending on the size of your team and stuff like that, I take that as actually you've done a lot of legwork there. Give me your SOA. That could be my evidence to say, yeah, you're all right. We'll do a light touch on you. And then the lower ones, you kind of like look at the contract and just ensure it's got the basics in and go from there. Because if you think about it, there's not a lot of resources at the moment for everyone in the security teams and like that. So to go into this amount of control and stuff like that. So doing that approach, it kind of alleviates you, and it's the big ticket items that actually get the focus that needs it. So that's the way I've dealt with it in the past. I'm not saying it's the gold standard, I'm saying it's a way of doing it. But my simple mind, that works well.
It makes complete sense, right? There's that kind of expectation of control that needs to be applied, depending, as you say, on the criticality of whatever they're processing, servicing, etc., from the service supplier side. And as you say, in terms of what they are and aren't able to demonstrate from what you've gone through, as you say, things like ISO certification, SOC certification, they're not straightforward processes for providers to go through, right? It's as you rightly mentioned, there's a clear demonstration that they've taken the time, the R&D effort, and the dollars spent to get that. There's a clear demonstration. Those that don't have it, as you say, naturally that pushes your risk up. So there's probably more detailed conversation to be had. Something else as well, I think, Jim, you mentioned as well about that kind of renewal cycle. I think sometimes in this conversation we'll talk about this as service providers. It sounds like all the kind of powers with them a little bit, but actually as a consumer, the shift to SaaS has actually put a lot more power, I think, in the consumer as well, because at that 3-year cycle, you're no longer invested in this huge, big, perpetual type engagement model. It's, well, actually, in 3 years, I might take it to another provider. So it's in the interest, where I'm going with this, it's actually also in the interest of the providers to not only deliver a good service, deliver good capability, etc., but also to make sure that they're aligning to your expectations around security, because the market for those providers is definitely becoming more aggressive because of the whole dimension of subscription-based models.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, let's shift back away from the kind of third-party side of things and just go back to insiders. Where are we currently with that whole kind of control versus trust thing? We've got more and more people now working from home on a regular basis, some who just never even come in the office. I mean, looking at the economics in the States at the moment, it's gotten so prevalent that people work from home now that there's a real commercial, problem with commercial property, to the point where, they're handing the keys back to the bank and saying, take it, just take it. We can't fill the office. We can't get the revenue from it, which, is very much the case over here in the UK. We heard, that HSBC are moving out their big plush office over in Canary Wharf, and they're moving over to a comparatively much smaller office. And they've been in that office for years. I watched that office being built. Interesting fact, I'm that old. I watched that being built, and I actually heard it being built as well, because I was pile driving those foundations in near the IT. I was in IT at that point. I was just getting into security, and all I heard all day long was the chunk of them banging those damn steel girders into the bedrock underneath the swamp, which is what London's built on. Anyway, moving away from that PTSD that I have for the banging, internal staff, I'm seeing a lot more discussions now with organizations, who are like, look, I just don't know who's doing what anymore. I trust my staff, but I'm starting to see cracks, like people aren't available when I need them to be. Are they working where they're mandated they can work? Are they working down the local pub, in the local coffee shop? Are they opening up documents that are sensitive, where people could be sitting there shoulder surfing? What are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing anything in the market yourselves with regards to that?
I'm certainly seeing and hearing the pain point, speaking to, security executives across the UK and broader. It's, as you say, the whole working from home thing's brought all kinds of challenges. You touched on some there. Like, consider anyone who used to have a secure room in their office building, right? And then in lockdown, and obviously it's kind of continued, that they're now working from home. So it used to be before that this was a lockdown room and only certain people could get into it. And now they're sat in their kitchen with their children running around, right? And the nanny or the cleaner's also coming in, kind of thing. That kind of security aspect has become a serious challenge, I think.
On their home wireless, no less, don't forget.
On their home wireless, which they probably never changed the router password for, no doubt. But because it's so much easier just to leave it as it is. But that's a different conversation, right? So the whole landscape there is exactly, yeah, absolutely, with the ID just showing through the window as well.
That's the classic one, yeah.
Yeah. So, and that definitely comes with that kind of control versus trust. Like, we still need to enable those individuals to perform their function. It's still sensitive and critical to the business, but there is an aspect of trust, I guess, in terms of the working environment, that they're not doing those things. But, how much control can you put on someone working from home? Or, as you say, if we provide the flexibility for people to work from anywhere, which I don't know if anyone said zero trust yet. I think I may have said it at the start, but it kind of comes in, obviously, with the whole trust discussion.
In time, David, in time.
It's interesting how some people react to those two words, right? Does it mean we don't trust the employees? It kind of ties a little bit into this topic. But yeah, it's that tricky thing of finding that balance with the new way that people are working, enabling them to do their job with an aspect of trust. So it's come back to your question at the very start. This is a control versus trust model there for sure. To your question, am I seeing anything specific in the market? There's definitely more focus being put on it. I haven't seen anything that's really solving the problem of people should they be able to print sensitive documents at home, right? And then what do they do with that kind of stuff? As you say, if they're showing something sensitive on the screen, who's looking over the shoulder? That's a very tricky one to protect and enforce upon.
I'm all in for a paperless office. I don't allow anybody to print anything personally. I don't think we need to in this day and age of tablets and stuff.
You've never worked at a legal firm.
I've worked with legal firms, and we do work with them at the moment, and they still have phenomenal amounts of paper.
They love printing stuff. And wet signatures. Building on what Barry's saying is the trust of the employee being working from home, but it's not in that. It's like you get the people that work from on holiday abroad. They go away for a week, but they obviously don't put leave in. But then you've got insurance issues, you've got tax issues, all sorts of weird or wonderful things. So there is a lot of trust in the employees who are working from home, but ensure that they are actually working from home, not from Albania or some like red listed country where they might actually put themselves in danger, and your actual IT assets that you've got that has the sensitive data on. It's that type of stuff as well. You've got to consider as well.
Yeah, or down the Red Dragon in South London, kind of in some of the more unpleasant parts where your laptop can get nicked, or Tunbridge Wells, yeah. Royal Tunbridge Wells, I have thank you very much. But no, it's a good point, because I mean, the one thing I want to kind of highlight there is, when we talk about trust, we're not always talking about trust of organizations or institutions or anything like that. We're also talking about trust of the devices themselves. Do we trust those devices? When back in the day when everybody was in the office and people's devices were on their desk and you only had maybe a few people with laptops, like the roving salespeople, that kind of thing, your level of control was significantly higher. And you didn't need to worry about trust so much. Your endpoint security would do a lot. We're seeing a lot, being a consultant and looking at a lot of organizations, different ways that they work. We're seeing a big return to kind of host-based security, and backed up by logs from SIEMs and alert generation and how that's being done. I mean, comms these days is so much better than it was even 10 years ago. The ability to use like 5G, 4G. You've got obviously the traditional internet, which quite often has a 5G backup. A dongle that you plug in. If the whole thing does go down, you can still operate just over the 5G network. I know BT have got quite a popular product in that nature. But now we're looking at a situation where those devices are in environments we don't know. Remote wiping has come back with. You remember remote wiping, which was a big thing when laptops first started to be kind of pushed out to the wider workforce. That's come back significantly. A lot of people are saying, right, I want to be able to remote wipe, and if you go back probably pre-pandemic, just before pre-pandemic, I hadn't even heard anybody talking about it for years. And now all of a sudden it's boom. It's like come full circle. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? When it comes to the technological stack, do we trust, or do we...
I bargain on the side of control with like the likes of NDMs that obviously there's 10 a penny out there now, and that control exactly what apps you can load. Don't give them the admin credentials. Trust the sales. But it's that type of stuff. Having that remote wipe functionality, it's a godsend, honestly. The amount of times I've had a call into the security team and stuff like that of like, I've lost my laptop. Where were you last night? The pub, by any chance? It's that kind of thing. That is an absolute godsend, even if it turns back up. I mean, I've seen some organisations' laptops turn up on like auction sites because they got lost in transit or whatever, or just general loss.
Is this politicians in taxi cabs by the chance?
It's that type of stuff. And then we've had the buyers ring the organisation up because they get the splash screen saying this is locked out by X company. Ring X company going, I've bought your laptop from this auction site. Can you unlock it, please? It's kind of like, no, you bought a brick. But yeah, but yeah, controls like that. There is an element of trust that's saying, like, we expect you to, not lose your laptop. Don't take it to the pub. That type of thing. People will do that, let's be honest. But as long as you've got the mitigated controls of if the worst happens, generally, yeah, you could. Yeah. That's where I've seen it being tackled.
There is, I think, probably a very logical mindset to have less trust for those endpoints and rely more on controls. As you say, remote wiping, it absolutely makes a lot of sense these days, because who knows where these devices end up? Well, we've seen, as you kind of jokes about, lots of interesting examples of that. I think as well, where we need to be going with controls, and we're seeing this anyway, right? You mentioned before, Iain, right there about that. Well, what if someone goes on holiday and we're allowing remote working, but if they go to a country that they shouldn't be in? Now, if we're taking contextual data points about where that user is in the world and what they're trying to access, there should be things that we're putting from a control perspective to say, well, not only the signature of that device do we trust less, but now actually all the attributes of where you are, what you're trying to do, etc. Is that a block access or reduce access type mindset? So I think taking more contextual data points as well at the point of authentication, because that's ultimately what we're going to be using devices for, is trying to access some other resource, right? It's a sensible approach. You're seeing more and more focus as well, I think, on things like secure sessions where data should be stored. Like, for example, browser-based attacks are becoming more and more the norm. Do we want to be storing authentication tokens on these devices now? And that moves into a controls type discussion, right? Removing authentication tokens and session cookies from the workstation, because if I do buy that from an auction, right, or just remotely compromise it, which is probably the more logical approach, then there's an obvious intrusion point there. So shifting away from trusting of the devices, especially those with internet connections, is a sensible approach and leans more into the control section for me.
Which leads us into something you just mentioned before about the whole sort of zero trust thing. This seems to be the way that we're going. I think a lot of the rhetoric we're seeing, a lot of the discussions that I'm seeing being done in the media, the information security communities anyway, many people seem to be going towards that zero trust thing going forward now. Is that inevitable? Is that inevitable across the board? Is that something that you are we're just going to have to get used to? Is basically trust dead now when it comes to the future? What do you think?
It is one of the most common conversations, certainly that I'm having, right, with organizations. It's shifted from that, we should think about what zero trust is, to now people putting money behind this and programs and frameworks to implement a zero trust architecture. I think it can get a little bit muddy, those two words, because I think a lot of people are playing on it, and it should be more of a mindset and approach that organizations take, and it's going to vary depending on who it is. The concept of it, lost an earpiece, the concept of it, I think is something that we are going to and should embrace, right? Because it plays on everything that we just talked about. The change in the way that work, the consuming of more service. We've got devices that we no longer own. We've got platforms that we no longer run. We've got data stored in locations we're not responsible for. And we've got employees working in environments that we've got zero control over. So moving to that kind of more zero trust, so that never trust, always verify mindset. It makes a lot of sense. I think employees should realize that if their security teams are talking zero trust, that doesn't mean they don't trust them, but it's more when that human being becomes a digital identity, that's the bit we need to, kind of reduce the trust against, because, David Higgins traversing across the digital wire, is it really me, or is it someone else behind that keyboard? So I'm definitely seeing that as where organizations are going. It seems a sensible approach because of all the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, weirdly enough, on that score, I'm seeing quite a few discussions starting to kick up about that whole signature kind of based authentication and continuous authentication, where you've got an algorithm. I mean, there was a few of them back in the day, but now obviously AI being the buzzword. You've got an AI that's actually assessing the way that you operate your technology, whether or not it actually is that person who's logged in. I mean, let's face it, multi-factor authentication is a thing now. I don't know why we haven't had it for a long, long time, usernames and passwords. I mean, me and Iain have always laughed. They're completely useless when you're just utilizing those two. You need to have a second factor, or even sometimes a third factor, depending upon what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
Why don't we make it 5-factor? I don't know, but I mean, Or 7. I mean, we talked about biometrics. That's the easiest option, but then we get into that whole privacy thing, which Iain is particularly skilled at talking about. It's certainly interesting, but I'm going to let Iain have his piece about zero trust rather than rabbit on.
Yeah, it's the way the world's going. Let's be honest. It's got to the point where, like, if you've got the keys to the network, so to speak, you're a network engineer and you can access everything. You're having one of those FIDO keys to plug in, and hopefully you won't leave it left plugged in the laptop. But it's that type of approach there. But I think everyone's taking it. MFA, that's become the standard for most organizations now. I mean, using like Microsoft MFA, that's, it's great because you have to punch in the code now and everything. And, then if you've got it set up, you can have the biometrics as well. So you kind of have that multi-factor, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, there is an element of, because people are people, let's be honest, and they're going to take these devices around. You need that control. They're going to leave them in the pub, let's be honest. So you need that control. And even if they are, they do get breached or attacked in a certain way, you need that other factor to protect you from that as well, not just through an accident of that person or nefarious action, but a nefarious action of another actor. You need to, And then when it comes to the privacy element, you've got to make sure that you're actually doing it properly and storing that data, the biometric stuff and stuff like that. But another control that we can always add in for you, Jim, is like gate walking, just add that in as well. Why not? So they have to walk past the screen, and not just the face. So they see how the gangly your walk is and stuff like
that. I mean, we could take it to silly levels, but I mean, in all honesty, I mean, this all sounds great, but is this just going to further increase the cost of security for an organization? I mean, we were joking sort of before we went on, well, not joking, we were discussing before we went on about how, specifically American vendors seem to be raising their prices quite significantly. Unfortunately, we're looking at a case where our information security budgets are so bad still. We still don't have enough to secure an environment. Buy one GRC tool and maybe some endpoint security and boom, your budget's pretty much extinguished in some cases. And this is kind of medium-sized firms. You add a layer of like... ISO 27001 certifications because you need it for your customers, and God forbid PCI DSS as well. And you're looking at quite a significant build just alone for that, let alone everything you're going to need for zero trust. Are we going to wind up being one of the most significant expenses for an organization? And are we going to start moving out of having, I think, what do they say? There's like 10 to 20% of the IT budget is normally what people assign to security. But, are we pricing ourselves out?
Prices have gone through the roof for everything. It's much like life in general at the moment. It's been... absolutely great down, especially with the budgets and stuff like that. Ideally, if you worked with an organization that was security conscious, you'd have a separate budget from IT, because let's be honest, it helps IT, I'll give you that. IT will probably implement it, but you need a separate budget at the end of the day for security, because it is its own cost. The certifications, they're not cheap anymore, let's be honest. And the way that I'm seeing the costs, just as you're saying before, vendors just really put the prices up and you're squeezing the budget. And we're in a macroeconomic downturn, even though it looks like we'll eventually come out of it. Organizations are tightening budgets to deal with that in macroeconomic downturn as well. And that includes the security budget. And to be honest, in most organizations, security is kind of like the last thought into the budget until they've had a breach, which is the classic cliche. But that's what it is. It's always been that way. So then you are forced to rely on trust a lot. And then so you can have X amount of controls, and then you're going to have to rely on trust. So yeah, that's the way it is, unfortunately, as the world's
I suppose
all doom and gloom.
Trust doesn't cost you anything until somebody breaches it, but when they breach it, it tends to be kind of epic. David, what are your thoughts?
Very much along the same line. I think lots change in the security industry and where security sits within organizations. And I think we're seeing security not necessarily report up to IT like it used to and become, reporting into technology or even some cases into risk or CFOs, right? Which makes sense because really this is a risk game that we're in, right? We're mitigating a form of risk that the business is facing, and they face many different risks. So at some point, and I guess this has always been a tricky one, but there's a lot of work on quantitative risk assessment, etc. That there needs to be a value that you put on this, right? We could secure our houses and cars to the nth degree, but at some point it simply becomes impractical. It becomes more expensive than the car itself, or more expensive than the house itself. It's getting those budgets right. It's getting that risk assessment right, and putting the right limits on it. And obviously that's going to vary, of course, depending on who the organization is and what they're protecting. But there can be a tendency where that could get out of hand. But I think the right assessments, because again, ultimately we just got to remember we're in a risk game here. The fact that cyber's at the front of it, it's no different than financial risk or any other kind of risk. It's a risk to the operation of the business.
Well, there we go. I mean, we've reached the high end of the time together. It's been an interesting conversation. I think it's a conversation that we're probably going to be having to have again in another year's time. I mean, this whole world in InfoSec in general is changing so quickly. The tools that are available, the situations, the budgets, being dropped because of the economic problems, but the cost of the tools, as Iain pointed out, rising, because they need to make more in order to meet the challenges of this economic problem, means that we're going to have to be a hell of a lot more selective and a lot more adaptive when it comes to us CISOs and day-to-day security people looking after our environments. We're going to have to get really clever, as opposed to what it was before, where we still had some form of budget and the prices of tools were still kind of reasonable. Because I think if it keeps going the way it's going, I don't know, you're going to have to go back to basics on your defense in depth and look objectively at what you can do with what you've got, because ultimately, if a company's losing money, they're not going to have budget for security. And as David points out, if it costs more to secure the environment than the environment is worth or bringing in, then what's the point? You can't mitigate absolutely everything. And this is where me and Iain have discussed, and I know, we've all probably discussed this a number of times. Security doesn't need to be expensive. It just needs to work and be effective. But, sometimes you have to do that kind of trust element in not only your ability, because I say to a lot of up and coming InfoSec people, one of the most important aspects of your career to develop is the ability to respond to incidents. Because, you're never going to be in a situation where an incident isn't just around the corner. One could happen today, one could happen tomorrow, one could happen in 5 years' time. You could have a good 5 years sitting around reveling in the fact that whatever you've done is awesome. But, anyway, we're not talking about instant response. We're talking about control and trust. So thank you ever so much for your insight, guys. Let's look to review on this again in a year's time. Hopefully economic, issues will have lifted a little bit, or maybe it's all going to get worse and we're going to see even worse tooling, or maybe AI will take over and kill us all. Who knows?
Maybe it's AI doing the podcast next time, right?
Yeah, if we say AI enough, then we'll get on the algorithm for YouTube much better and Spotify. So, it's all good. But no, thank you ever so much, guys, for your insights. And we look forward to seeing you guys again relatively soon.
Thank you, Jim.
Bye.
Brilliant. And to all of you out there watching, thank you ever so much for watching this edition of Razorwire. We're producing content all the time. If there's ever anything you think that we haven't discussed or we should discuss in greater depth, please feel free to get in contact with us in a variety of different ways that you will easily find to get in touch with us. And we'll see what we can do about getting maybe David and Iain together, and we can argue about this or some other subject matter. There's always a massive amount of subject matter to discuss in the realm of InfoSec. So for all of you out there, thank you for watching. Look after yourselves, and we'll be seeing you again soon. Goodbye.